Hello everybody and welcome to my brand new channel. I am basically going to be doing all things English related, particularly for senior students in VCE. The reason behind this obviously is because we are experiencing unprecedented times when it comes to coronavirus or COVID-19. And I really wanted to come up with a way to connect with my students, but also to help out anybody else who might be struggling at the moment to access resources or be able to do schooling as usual, but don't want to fall behind. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Stephanie and I am an English teacher at a small school in regional Victoria in Australia. I have been teaching English since 2013. I'm also trained to teach media. Prior to that, I've worked in a number of different industries, but I have a Bachelor of Communications in Journalism and a grad dip in Literary Studies, as well as my grad dip in Secondary Education. And I've taught VCE English since my first year in 2013. I've taught VCE 11 and 12. I've taught Year 12 English 4 times. I think I've taught Year 11 like 6 or 7 times, maybe more. I think I may have taught Year 11 almost every year, bar one that I've been teaching. I love English a lot. I'm very passionate about it. I really enjoy watching my students understand things and get things. I'm also a mum to a 2-year-old boy named Emmett. I'm married, 31. I have another baby on the way that is due end of July, early August. I thought this would be a really fantastic way for me to be able to help my students, but as I said, help others as well. So if you're enjoying this content, like, subscribe, turn on the notifications bell. Please comment below anything that you thought was useful for this video or any future videos that you would be interested in seeing. My students at the moment, this year I'm teaching Year 10 and Year 11, and my students are moving on to analysing arguments. So the focus of my videos, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to be on analysing argument. After that, we're moving on to text response, and we are studying Macbeth at Year 10 and Jasper Jones at Year 11. So obviously I'll also be focusing on how to do text response, and text response is also known as responding to text. So today's video is going to focus primarily on the acronym that I use with my students, which is called Ccatsp. So I'm going to basically cover off the basis of that, talk to you about why I find it useful, what it actually stands for, and how you can use it to begin to form your understanding of argument and of writing the beginning of an essay. And just talk about how to unpack contentions and things like that when you're looking at articles. At the moment, the news is very heavily saturated with COVID-19, so I probably will focus on that for this video, but in future videos, I'm going to be scouring further and just take us back a month or two and look into some more broader range of issues that we would have covered if this wasn't happening. In this video, I'm going to talk about the acronym that my school used when I started, which was CATS. And then what happened was I had a student in 2014, and we were talking about the fact that contention isn't enough and you need to expand on that and you need to include purpose or intention. So he's like, well, why don't we call it Ccatsp? And so it kind of just stuck from there, and it's obviously kind of strange. It's like Ccatsp, meow, 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 to remember. So essentially we use that, and then this year we've added to it, and it's got an extra C, and it's Ccatsp now. So that stands for context, contention, audience, tone, style, and purpose. The first thing I want to talk about is context. Context is the general overview of what the issue is about. So a context provides the reader of your piece with a bit of insight into why the issue is relevant, why the issue is current in society, and why the author or authors are actually writing about it. So obviously, an instance of what we're going to be looking at today, which is COVID-19, the reason or the context behind that would be that it's dominating world headlines around the globe. So you might say something like, the COVID-19 crisis or COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 has been dominating headlines. And whilst many experts are concerned with the health ramifications of the virus, there are others who are more concerned with the economic impacts. That's just a rough example of what you could do. And of course, this kind of comes up to you, your skills, your ability and to understand. You want it to be succinct. You want it to be concise. You don't really want to write more than a sentence or two on this. You don't want to overload it. There is discussion amongst English teachers about the relevance sometimes of introductions in analysing argument pieces. I personally still like them if they're written well, and obviously structurally their introduction is in the vast majority of essays that you write. We are going to stick with the traditional structure, and that is writing introductions. So context is the first one. The second letter in the acronym Ccatsp is contention. Now, contention is very important. It's really important that you write it again in a concise and clear way in around a sentence. And often the easiest thing to do when you're thinking about contention is to kind of just relate it back to what is the opinion that is coming through of the author or authors. And you can kind of frame it or phrase it in a way that starts with that. That the government should be shutting down states in Australia, or that Donald Trump's view on COVID-19 is dangerous and reckless, where he's putting economic prosperity above human life, or that the 2020 Olympics should have gone ahead and not been postponed or cancelled. So it's just a general overview of what the author of that piece is actually trying to get across. I have my hands crossed. I realize it's very unnatural for me. If you are one of my students watching, you'll know that I talk with my hands all the time. That is the second C. Then we move on to audience. A lot of students forget this part, and I just want to talk, if you're a Year 12 student watching, a dead giveaway for audience often will be found in the background information that can be located on the front of your article or the front of your piece just prior to when you turn over. It's like a little box, and often it'll give you a bit of an insight into like who the background or what the background information actually is. So it might say that it's citizens of a small regional town. Like in the past, we've obviously had if you've looked at past exams, we've had the watermelon issue, had the coffee issue. So often you'll find that the issues that are used by VCEE in the end of year exams are community focused issues. They aren't issues like coronavirus or climate change or euthanasia, because they're too contentious. So you'll almost be guaranteed to find something that's fairly lighthearted in its intent and nature. In identifying the audience, you don't want to be too general. So you actually want to be really specific. You don't want to just say that the audience is adults, because the likelihood of that is minimal. More likely is that your audience is probably going to be, for example, in the instance of like the coffee, the citizens that live in the small town, the small business owners, and that kind of thing. You might talk about parents being an audience, or teachers being an audience, the government being an audience, and then sort of extending on audience, we want to think about stakeholders. And stakeholders are people who have a vested interest in the issue. So they might not be the direct audience. They might be more of a secondary audience who might have some sort of investment in what's going on. So if we're talking about the Olympics, the primary audience might be the Olympic Committee. And then like a stakeholder would likely be someone who is attending the Olympics or intended to attend the Olympics, or it might be an athlete themselves. So they're really important to think about. The next letter is tone. Now, tone is really important when you're analysing argument. One of the easiest ways, in my opinion, to note when arguments are shifting is when tone changes. And I've often talked about this with my students, that opinion pieces often follow a structure where they open with an informative, factual tone, and then they shift into more of a sarcastic, cynical, questioning tone where they're really attacking a particular audience. They might be doing an ad hominem attack on the federal government or on the state government or on the Olympic Committee, and then they often shift into more of a urgent or pleading tone in the form of a call to action, where they're encouraging their audience to actually do something, to go away and take something from that particular article. So that's sort of something to think about. You don't have to mention tone if it's if the tone shifts. So if the tone's consistent, which is very rare, if the tone's consistent, you do mention it in the introduction. However, I find the most effective way of discussing tone is to weave it throughout your piece and discuss the tone shifts, and they should be happening. They should be tone shifts. Discuss them as they are happening. So I think that that's really important to think about. That tone is very important just in the overarching, I guess in the overall scheme of things when it comes to writing analysing argument essays. And when you are talking about tone, you don't actually have to say they shift tone or they use this tone. You can just say something like sarcastically contending or arguing fervently or enthusiastically positing. So you can use lots of different types of language to articulate tone, as opposed to just saying the tone in the piece is sarcastic, which is kind of dry and boring. You want to make your essay stand out. So whilst you don't want to be like overly verbose, you do want to use language that's precise, specific to the task. And I will talk about the criteria in a different video, because this video is already going longer than I intended it to. Now we want to move on to the last couple, which is style and then purpose. Style is really easy. Is it an opinion piece? Is it a letter to the editor? Is it an editorial? And when you're thinking about that, I want you to also consider the differences between an opinion piece and an editorial. An opinion piece is just that. It is someone's opinion. It might be a journalist at one of the newspapers or one of the media outlets, or it actually just might be a regular person who has a specialization in a field, like a parent or a teacher or a member for parliament or a professor. So it doesn't necessarily actually have to be a journalist. An editorial, in most cases, is a more rounded sort of argument. It's not quite as opinionated. It generally tends to be a little bit less biased in the language. It will have a contention and it will have a focus. It normally represents the views of the editorial team at the newspaper, so the entire editorial team. And it could be written by one person or it could be written by a collection of individuals who represent the voice of the organization that they're working for. So that's the main difference if you're getting confused. Other styles, for example, could be an online blog, newsletter, website, that kind of thing. So that's just identifying the style. And in that, you also want to identify who the author or authors are, what date it was published, and what publication it was featured in. And you want to include that and weave that into your introduction as well. Lastly, purpose. Purpose is a big one. So purpose is really thinking about what is the overall point of this argument? What is it that they're trying to actually get across? And what is it that they're trying to achieve in terms of the action in which or of which they would like the audience to take? So where it expands on the contention is it's really the overall intention, which is another term that a lot of teachers use, of the piece. It is, why the heck was it written in the first place? What is the point of it? It's not just, that the Olympics should be cancelled. It's that people should take note that this should be happening. It's a call to action. It is the ability for the author to really say, this is what I want you to be doing, and this is why you should be doing it, and this is how you can actually execute it. And this is what you can do as just a regular general member of the public. That's the acronym that I use with my students. That's the acronym that I find the most helpful. You, of course, can use whichever acronym you like, but I find that that is just an easy one to remember. And if you use that as sort of a building block for your essay and a building block for your introduction, it'll put you in a really good position. So thank you very much for tuning in and watching. I hope you all get a bit out of this, and I will see you in the next video.